Ladies and gentlemen, we finally have the official OM617 head stud kit, which I have been working on for years and years and years. And this is massive for me. I never thought this day would come. I'll give you a little more of a history lesson on that at the end of the video. The main point of this video, of course, is just the installation instructions. So, first off, why do you need head studs? So that we can hold more boost, so that we're not warping the head. And I'd love to get rid of this pesky, notorious oil leak here at the back. If you can see this, this has kind of all been washed. It's kind of rusty, but this is oil leaking from between the head and the block right here in this corner. So the head stud kit is part of my solution to this problem. The problem with the OEM head bolts is they found that when they did the destructive testing, those bolts just kept stretching and stretching and stretching. They didn't reach a certain point and just snap. And so people with these cars and these engines, they'll find that if their head gasket, starts to leak, they might be able to tighten all the bolts. But that only lasts so long, because then that bolt just keeps stretching a little more and then their head gasket leaks. So these head studs are not going to stretch like that. They're going to stay where you torque them to. So let's dive right into the installation instructions here. Now obviously there's going to be some disassembly required, which you can see I've already done a fair amount. So we're going to take our hard lines off, going from our injectors to our pump. You're going to take the valve cover off. You're also going to have to remove what they call the rocker arm group. So all of this is in the factory service manual. I'm going to try to call out the most pertinent stuff. If you do want to search this part, they refer to this as the rocker arm group. And so they tell you use the crankshaft bolt, which is 27mm socket, and try to get all of your cam lobes, the tips, pointing away from our followers down here so that there's no load on these guys. And then you just take these two bolts out, pull that straight up, and then same thing for this back group. Try to get all your lobes pointing away so all of your arms are up. Take your 3 bolts out, you lift straight up because these sit down on dowel pins. That's how they're located. So part of this whole thing was I had to wait for some special studs to be made because we got 3 different lengths here. Fortunately, 2 of them I was able to find in different applications that are close enough on the lengths that we made them work, and then one of them I had to wait to be special made. Now that being said, down the road here I do plan on either waiting and introducing a new shorter stud for these guys that go next to our injectors, or I might have one made for those, because if the injector is not clocked perfectly so that the flat lines up and allows you to get the stud and nut and washer down in there, you're going to have to loosen or tighten your injector. So you can take your chances. You can loosen the injector just enough to squeeze the stud in and then try to retorque it, but you do risk that injector leaking afterwards. The bad thing is these do require a new crush washer underneath them if you remove them. Of course, I've played my luck with that too and found it's hit or miss. Sometimes you can reuse your crush washers underneath your injectors and they'll still seal up just fine. So it's a crapshoot. Chances are if you're building an engine and you're putting head studs in, you're going to have this whole top end disassembled anyway. But for those of you who are going in and kind of retroactively putting these studs in, just keep that in mind. I know it's a pain in the butt for right now. At least we have studs for now though, and I'm fully aware of it, and in the future I absolutely plan on making these guys on this outer row enough shorter so that you don't have to touch your injectors. So what I'm going to do for this engine, and the sake of time with this video, since eventually I'm going to be actually ripping this whole thing down even further before I build it back up again, I'm just going to loosen the injectors to where I can get studs in for the video. I will have to take the rocker arm groups out though, because you cannot actually get these bolts out or get the new studs in, especially this guy. So on your first cam tower, your rocker follower group, you're going to notice you have tips pointing 3 different directions. You've got this guy pointed this way, this guy pointed that way, and then these 2 are both pointed up. So I'm going to put this follower kind of coming down at an angle this way, so I can see a light gap underneath pretty much all these guys. Now down here, remember, we're always spinning the engine clockwise, not counterclockwise, so we don't risk loosening the crankshaft bolt. And this is going to take an 8mm Allen socket bit. Remove the washer and bolt and set those aside. And if you can't lift straight up, they suggest taking a dead blow hammer, like a plastic hammer, and giving very light taps. Make sure you keep track of your washers off your bolt. Those are not encapsulated washers, they do fall off. So I'm going to grab just a dead blow hammer to hopefully break these free. There you have it. It makes a pretty audible little click. You can see your dowel sleeves. So now we're going to repeat the same thing for the rear group. So there's a very fine window when on this group, the second and the fourth springs are not compressed. All the others are not compressed, but the second one starts to decompress, and as soon as that decompresses, number 4 starts to compress, and there's a little tiny gap, a little window where none of these springs, you can actually just watch your valve springs, see if they're moving at all. So there's a little window, we should be able to get these out. Very tight, but if you have a little patience and kind of work it one way to the other, you can't get them all off. So you are going to need your M12 XZN triple square bit. It's the same thing the TDI uses, ironically. And then I will put this PDF on the website, on my website. It's got your torque order. So you'll notice you have 1 through 22, and then you have these little A's. We are not doing anything for the A's. Those are some M8 fasteners. We are only worried about 1 through 22. And so just like the Kubota, if you already watched my installation instruction video for the Kubota head stud kit, we're going to go in reverse order. Sorry if I was off camera there. So we're going to start with 22. We're going to remove that bolt. We're going to put our stud in, install it, torque it, done with it. Move on to 21, and we're going to go all the way down to number 1. And if we do it in this sequence, again, as of right now, August of 2025, I don't know of any adverse effects to doing this as far as disturbing your head gasket. If I do hear of anything, of course, I will put updates out, try to get people notified to not use this method if there's anything wrong with it. But as far as I know, there's nothing wrong with this for right now. So the only other thing we're going to have to do throughout this process right now is possibly turn our injectors if they don't allow our nut to fall on top of the stud, because that you can usually get, you just put the washer on the head, you set the stud through the washer into the block, and then the nut is usually what presents the problem. And I remember installing these head bolts. This is my first OM617 that I built back in 2011. And I remember I think it's a 3-stage torque sequence, and then you do 90 degrees of rotation. And the way these are coming out, they don't feel that tight. So you are going to have 22 oily bolts. You probably want to grab a bag or something to throw those in. It's going to be messy pulling these out. So let's walk you through real quickly what other tools you're going to need. For the nuts, for the new nuts, you're going to need a 14 millimeter 12 point. You need a torque wrench. You're going to need a 5 millimeter Allen. I don't have a T handle, so I'm just putting this 3/8 drive and an extension that's got the knurled shaft, so I have something to grip. That's just to help finger tighten the studs. Need something to open your bags with. So this hardware does come vacuum sealed, and then of course once you cut into it, then it opens up. Here you can see our washers, vacuum sealed. So the first step, and the instructions that come with this kit are extremely thorough. I want to show you the engine side so I can kind of tell you some torque specs and show you the tools you're going to need and the sequence you're going to do, and show you any weird stuff like taking the rocker towers out. I really don't want to sit here and re-explain the written instructions that already come with this kit because they're extremely detailed. Follow it to a T, step by step. You're not going to have any problems, okay? So they tell you your washers need to be washed because they have an anti-corrosive oil, basically like rust slick, that's applied to them to keep them from rusting. You guys want these things to be like surgically clean. So take them all out of the bag, throw some brake parts cleaner on them, wipe them off, let them dry, make sure they're completely clean, because the way this works, this washer is going to sit against the head, and the head also needs to be clean. So you're going to have plenty of brake parts cleaner and rags and towels. But this dry washer is going to sit against the dry head, and that needs to bite in basically. Then you're going to end up putting the stud in, and when you put the nut on, you're going to lubricate the bottom side of the nut, and that nut is going to spin on top of this washer, and you want this to be essentially a bearing so that we can get a consistent torque value. You don't want this washer to be spinning because then that's going to throw everything off. So we have our first bolt out, so we're going to wipe down, get some brake parts cleaner on a rag, wipe this off, let that dry off, make sure that's clean. If by any chance you have anything down in these holes, I would have a really good light to shine down in there. If you do have anything in there, you're going to have to blow that out or vacuum that out, and then spray brake parts cleaner in there, blow it out, let it dry. Because if you have liquid down in the boss, in the block, and you try to thread the stud down in there, you could hydraulically explode your block. So obviously that would be catastrophic and terrible, and you don't want to do that. So you do need to make sure the holes are dry and clean before installing the stud. Next thing you're going to do, you're going to find that you have 3 different sizes of fasteners. So you have long, medium, and short. And so it should be pretty obvious what goes where. Your tallest ones are going to go on the cam tower. Your mediums are going to go on the top side of the head, I would call it, basically underneath the valve cover. And then your 5 shorties are going to go out here right next to your injectors. So I do love all the vacuum aspects of P1. They ship these things in a vacuum sealed bag, so that's going to keep atmosphere out, which means these things are going to have an extremely long shelf life. You're not going to have to worry about if you buy these and you got the money saved up right now, so you want to buy them, but you don't plan on installing them for 2 or 3 years. They're not going to rust out on you sitting on your shelf in your garage. As long as you keep them in their vacuum sealed bag, still under vacuum seal. The other cool thing is they actually heat treat these in a vacuum sealed chamber so that as they're cooling, that dirty atmospheric air isn't getting in there when they're in a vulnerable stage where it can cause impurities to become embedded in them and weaken them. So I do enough head studs. I just keep a bag of the lube and brush on hand. Now the lube is absolutely critical. This is one thing that drives me nuts with ARP is they just kind of recommend what lube you use. You have to use P1's lube. The torque specs were calculated using this lube. It's not about having the slipperiest or stickiest stuff. It's about having the most consistent, because we need to know exactly how much friction there is when we're torquing to that final value, so that we know how much clamp load we're putting on. The clamp load is basically the most important thing we're after here. So if you change the lube, you change the clamp load, and then we don't have any idea what we're getting. So to identify the stud, the end with the Allen hole in it is going to be the top. The bottom is just going to have a flat bottom. So you are going to lube up the stud, and there's a couple different ways you can do this, but we want the lube to be flush with the threads, the peaks of the threads. So you can apply it pretty liberally and then use your brush to kind of flatten it out and spread it into those threads. We don't want any resistance going in. You should be able to tighten these all the way into the block by hand. So as I'm putting things back together here, just some other points I forgot to mention. When you're putting your stud down in dry as a test fit, if that is really binding, if you can't thread that in just by finger, you might have to reach out to P1 to get a special bottoming tap so that you can clean those threads out in the block so that you can get that stud all the way down to the proper depth. So the best thing to do is thread a dry stud down in here first. Make sure it goes all the way down without any problems. And then if you're good, you put your lube on, and then we'll put this stud all the way down to the bottom. Again, we're not trying to use the Allen to torque the stud down. We're just using it to help us get a grip on it and speed things up a little bit. So there, we are bottomed out by hand. So I'm just going to 1/16 of a turn, back it off. Now we've got our clean, dry washer. We're going to put that on there. And the important thing here is keep your lube only on the top side of the washer here. I like to put the lube on the threads on the stud and then on the bottom of the nut, on the flange of the nut. You will probably find you'll want a deep socket, 14 millimeter, 12 point, so that it will fit up against your cam tower. Now, torquing is done in 3 stages. We're going to start with 30 foot-pounds. I'm not going to call out the second 2 torque specs, because as we develop and go along and we learn, it's very possible that the final torque value for this kit could change. So that's going to be on the website. It's going to be in the written instructions. But basically, start with 30, because that gets the bolt stretching. You'll know what your final torque value is. So let's say it's 300 foot-pounds. We're going to subtract 30. So that's 270. And we're going to divide 270 in half. That's 135. We're going to add 135 to 30, which gives us 165. So we would torque 30, 165, 300, and that kind of splits it up evenly. And that's like a really outrageous example. Obviously, we're not torquing this to 300 foot-pounds, but I want to give you a number so that if you're not paying attention and you're just kind of partially paying attention to this video, you don't go out and torque it to what I'm using as an example. We want to make it so that when we find our torque click, the torque wrench is actually moving. If you have to stop because you just physically run out of arm sweep range, and then we come back and we just barely get the torque wrench moving and it clicks, that means we have kind of an unreliable torque value. Not a big deal if that happens. Simply loosen the nut and start over. Anytime you think you've screwed up your torque value, loosen it and start over. It's not a big deal at all. We are not going to go back and retorque this. People will say put 100 miles or 500 miles or an hour of run time on it or whatever, and then let it cool off and retorque. You aren't going to do that because we torque it once, and that's where it's at. If you have to go back and redo this, you would have to follow the same procedure and go back through and loosen, start at 22, loosen the nut off so there's no torque on it, and then retorque it. You're not going to come back in here with everything tight and set your torque wrench to the final torque spec and click everything. Do not do that, because that's going to throw your clamp force off. So now we're going to do our second torque. And I ran out of pole there, so hopefully we have enough to do our second. So we're still good there. And you're going to want to take note as you're going of how much travel it takes to get to that click, so that you give yourself enough room on the rest. Here's going to be our final torque. And now we can move on to our next one. Now I'm not going to sit here and show you all 22 head studs. I do want to show you one very important tip. For your injectors, you can go to O'Reilly Auto Parts. This is a 1 1/16 inch specialty socket. This is a spark plug socket. It's 3/8 drive. It's deep, and it's hollowed out on the inside all the way down to where the 3/8 drive flange is. A lot of sockets, once you get past where the nut would be or the bolt head would be, it's pretty solid in the middle. This one is actually hollow, so it allows you to fit over the injector body. So you can get that all the way down there. Might have to just give it some very light taps to get it to go over your paint or your rust. And then you can use that to loosen and torque your injectors. And just like the Kubota, keep in mind, once you get everything put back together, you will need to adjust your valve lash, obviously. So I'm going to rattle off some torque specs for you. The injector has a torque value of 70 to 80 Newton meters, which is kind of nice. If it's leaking, you can tighten it up a little bit more. See if that crushes the crush washer enough more that you can get that to seal. The hard lines that connect the injectors to the injection pump, those get torqued to 25 Newton meters. The rocker arm groups, those bolts that use the 8mm Allen head, those get torqued to 38 Newton meters. And then your valve cover gets torqued to 15 Newton meters. With wave washers, don't forget your wave washers. That's what keeps them from coming back loose. I hope this is enough of an explanation. It gets pretty monotonous and repetitive watching me do 22 studs. There's really nothing any different about any of these others other than, of course, the injectors like I mentioned. One more tip for the injector installation. You might find that you want to actually install the nut on the stud all the way down to the bottom of the thread. Get that down in the hole, and then you can back the nut off to the tip and get your lube spread in there and everything. It's kind of a fine work of art getting that in without taking the injectors out. Now, of course, if you take the injectors out, it's a walk in the park, easy peasy. And just a brief history lesson on how I got to this point, why it was such a pain, and why this kit is something that I was working so hard to obtain. So my buddy Vic, he worked on ARP trying to get a stud kit out, and they didn't want to do it. So he kind of figured out some existing studs of appropriate lengths that would work. The problem with that is they're mismatched tensile strengths. They're different. They take different amounts of torque to stretch the same amount to get equal clamping force. So your head is going to be doing this all the way across. You're not going to get even clamping load. They're going to have different stretching rates. We needed a kit with the same tensile strength across all the hardware. I contacted ARP myself. I probably worked on them the hardest. I actually sent them samples of OEM hardware to do destructive testing on. We got the lengths for everything. We got the clamping load and the tensile strengths figured out, so we're stronger than OEM. and then they come back and hit me with, oh, well, we need a $60,000 minimum purchase order to proceed with this, which was a joke. It was a slap in the face. They were telling me they just didn't want to do this kit for some weird reason. Not saying anything bad about their hardware, just saying it was pretty crappy. Been doing business with them for over, 10 years, and didn't want to help me out. So I went to OptiTorque. OptiTorque is the biggest joke. I mean, I really can't stress enough how disgusting my experience was with OptiTorque. They knowingly and intentionally wasted my time. They lied to me, telling me, hey, we're going to have this for you Halloween, Thanksgiving, New Year's. Kept leading me on, stringing me out. Eventually, I called the owner and I kind of let him have a piece of my mind. And you know what? That whole company, I will not do business with them. And after speaking to some colleagues who are also developing head stud kits and main stud kits, he had the exact same experience with OptiTorque. Thankfully, someone mentioned P1 Manufacturing to me, and they've been incredible to work with. They're getting all my business from here on out. All my business I can give to them, I'm giving to them. They're incredible to work with, super polite, friendly, fast, extremely knowledgeable. Not only are they extremely knowledgeable, but they're willing to share that knowledge with you, which is huge. And they helped me get this kit knocked out in a fraction of the time that I spent dealing with OptiTorque. They didn't nail me with some outrageous $60,000 minimum purchase order. I'm eternally thankful to P1 Manufacturing for helping me get this kit so I can release it to the public, so we can move on to the next thing, because I want to make a ton of power with an OM617. I'm not happy with 230 horsepower. I want to hit 300. I want to make this thing reliable. I want this to be a 1,000,000-mile engine with 300 horsepower. So this is just the next step. This is not the end of the road. This is a huge step. There's much more to come, folks. So hopefully I'm not boring you with the history lesson here, but I appreciate you tuning in, listening to the story, I appreciate you listening to my history lesson. I think, this could very well go down in the history books as being a huge step in the progression of the OM617. There are so many of these out there that we need to tap into their potential and really make the most out of these, because there aren't a ton of Cummins 4BTs out there anymore. There aren't a ton of OM605s that we can get our hands on, but there are a ton of OM617s. So I'm not going to talk your ears off. Thanks again for watching. If you have any questions, email me. I'll probably do a follow-up video if I do get any shorter studs to go past the injectors easier. And with that being said, we'll see you in the next video.